Yes, I have it so. Not to ever leave no one. Then I have it so. I need you, need you by my side. Watch it fall on mine. 'Cause I have it so. When I go to sleep at night, yes, I pray the Lord to hold me tight. When I go to sleep at night, yes, I pray the Lord to hold me tight. I need you, need you by my side. Watch it fall on mine. 'Cause I have it so. I love you, yes, I have it so. Not to worry no one. Then I have it so.
Hi everyone, welcome to the second episode of Cinemarx. We're going to be talking tonight about The Big Short. It's not intentional that both of them have been about Christian Bale, or at least tangentially about Christian Bale. That was a coincidence. I just think it's a really good movie to talk about because, obviously the 2008 financial crisis has so many political, social, economic implications, and it's a movie that discusses it fairly well, I think. So I have a guest tonight who's probably going to be on, I think, relatively frequently. Lauren is joining me, so say hi.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Uh,
Let's get depressed. Let's talk about crises.
It's not just about getting depressed, it's about getting angry as well. Getting angry is a very important part of this process.
I'm very good at that. I can help you.
Hey, Thrasher. Yeah, so I guess where to start? You know, there's so many talking points. I guess we can start by talking about what the basis is, how the crisis comes about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could, in a Marxist system, this is not likely to be a crisis that takes place because it just can't. So this is a gift of capitalism, I guess. Yeah, I don't know how to start. It's just infuriating, but I'll hold off on the true fury. Everybody remember the fawn housing crisis of 2007 that started with subprime loans being offered to people that weren't really qualified with adjustable rates that people could just predatorily take advantage of. Americans are not super into the fine print, and neither were the people selling these loans, clearly.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of people hear yes, you can have a mortgage at a low rate, and they go yes, I do want some housing security. You know, I think that's a fairly a reasonable thing for people to want. And you know, there's a lot of snake oil sales personship going into finding people who by ordinary standards would be inappropriate for a mortgage, and then telling them they can have a house that, you know, I think it's pretty understandable that most of them wouldn't look a gift house in the mouth sort of
Sure.
thing.
Yeah.
But I guess that's one of the many sort of irresponsibilities of the system that's highlighted by the movie, isn't it? It's like,
it's very much a passing the buck sort of mentality that it's not their problem directly and they don't see it coming. And you see that, I mean, this film, I think, is excellent at highlighting that structural problem that you see that there's not really any one resource that is in charge of this. Even the ratings company turns a blind eye because they are also in competition. And it's that competition that drives this mania that just disproportionately affects the market and essentially allows it to become a house of cards that can collapse and collapse in such a way that destabilizes the global economy at large, because being that it's tied to these banks, it's massive. And the fact that people kind of, I mean, I know people still talk about it, but I think that there is this glossing over of it, where there should still be this mortification. There should be this just scarlet letter on these people and these banks forever. And it should be a warning. You know, I think at the end of the film, you see that there's still the bespoke tranche opportunities that are now being basically written into mortgages. And the fact that these are allowed, it really signifies, at least in American politics, the issues that we have with government taking money from banks and big lenders, because it, like the repealing of the Glass-Steagall Act, which is something that was put in during the Great Depression to avoid situations like this. And Bill Clinton is the one that repealed it because, you know, Democrats take big money too. And that makes the world go round, but it also can cause a massive collapse. And there
yeah,
needs...
I
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's a problem that's like unique or particular to the US. It's like, I think the reason that this, like the housing market in the US was able to have this like sort of global flow on effect is more a product of the fact that the US is like, you know, the biggest economy in the world, rather than because there's something particular about the housing market in the States. Like, yeah, like the housing market, like in Sydney, for example, where I live, is just like has skyrocketed over the past few decades, to the point where like the idea of anybody on any sort of like medium to low wage paying job, it's a joke. The idea that you could ever have a chance to even apply for a mortgage, let alone, you know, at some point own a house. And like, you know, like it's in the multi-millions of dollars for anything that's like semi-decent in a nice area. But yeah, so it's like basically every person in my generation is just in a position to like where they're going to be renting their entire lives. It's like it's one of the consequences of housing as a commodity rather than as a thing to meet somebody's needs. It's like, and that's a key functioning point of the capitalist system, is like you can't, like nothing gets done under capitalism because it's like useful for people, or because it's something that is you know, healthcare doesn't happen because healthcare is a bad example actually, because there is a certain amount to which the capitalists want the working class to have like treatments for various different diseases, like, but like generally speaking, you know, as much as they can commodify something, make profit off of it, they will.
Right. You need to have customers being alive, sort of
Yeah.
face mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you need workers to be around and alive to be exploited.
Did you find that did the Sydney housing market also just, there was an oversaturation? Like there's an abundance of housing in the US, I would say, built. You see it a lot in Las Vegas, where I used to live. And it's interesting, in The Big Short, you see some shots of Las Vegas and they kind of, they pan away because they can't really show some of these buildings, but you see this. There's the Fontainebleau Hotel, which just stopped production because there wasn't any money to finish it. So it's basically this giant structure. It's like an homage to the failure of capitalism, especially in Las Vegas, because there was just such an oversaturation because they were selling so much. There were so much foreign investors. People are, you know, snatching up houses. And that's where to me, it's improbable that the bubble wasn't obvious from not only just, obviously these guys in the movie that notice the problems from the ground up, but noticing that there would be a bubble otherwise seems hard to imagine, because there's only there's like only so many people you can sell houses to. That's covered in the film, but unless you start making them investment opportunities for people that want to rent to clients. And you have a huge rental market in a place like Nevada, because the way that the rental rules are there, it's extremely valuable to be a landlord. It's easy to kick people out. It's not, it's pretty easy to rent. It's not the same sort of hoops that you have to jump in like in California and New York. So you did just see like there's just so many condos that just stop building. It's really cool if you go to Google Earth, you'll just see the imprint of like new housing developments that just stopped, and they just look like corn circles from the sky, because the money just stopped, and that's what happened. So
it's sort of hard to wrap your head around, like the extent to which this sort of thing like happens. Like, I mean, there's been a huge like construction and development boom in Australia, and I think for that reason there was there was less less flow-on effects in terms of housing specifically. Australia is one of the sort of few countries that's relatively, I mean, we're still, like, the economy is still depressed as it is everywhere. And it, it's an accident. Like it's not a product of like good policy or anything. It's just like a sort of, it's a coincidence of a particular set of factors that, Australia's economy is like not super based around like the more financial capital kind of things. Not that we don't have that sort of stuff, but it's also like a very heavy, like the main exports of Australia are like iron, coal, and gold, which like maintained their productive needs mostly because like China continued to like want to develop and expand, and China's like one of our biggest trading partners. That being said, though, like the state of China's economy, like China was not unaffected, and actually the construction of new industry and so on in China is like, that's propped up by a huge amount of like capital. At the end of the day, sorry, not just capital, but like finance capital specifically. So like that stuff is slowing down because there's just a sort of a glut of like debt in like in the Chinese economy, and that's at some point going to come to a crunch point. Like, the system of finance capital is one. Actually, that gets me to one of the points that I wanted to talk about, which was like the relationship of like finance capital to the real economy. It's like, because throwing money about the place doesn't actually do anything for society. It doesn't produce value. What it does is it makes it easier for certain other people to engage in in the productive economy, but it also it cuts out a certain portion of their profits from like being exploited by workers. But it's like the more removed finance capital comes from like the real productive economy of like, we're producing actual things or actual value that's based on the exploitation of workers. The more removed that comes out, the more like alien, the more I guess dangerous and fragile that sort of like chain of debt and loans and like bonds and stocks and all of these like different financial instruments all of that becomes basically a house of cards. And that's, I think, another contributing factor to the crisis, is that nobody saw it coming, because nobody actually thinks about where their money actually comes from, or like where it's going, or what its relationship is into the real world. Like, there's a point in the film where Baum finds out that he's betting against himself. Like, he's betting against Merrill Lynch.
Betting against Morgan Stanley.
Morgan Stanley, yeah. Yeah, and he's like, please tell me you do not have more than 4 billion. And they've got 15 billion in.
It's gross.
Like,
I mean, well, that's the way I feel about it. Like, after our chat last night, I just feel like capitalism as a whole is insider trading, because to be effective and to make money, you sort of have to be a scumbag in a little bit. Like, to edge out other people, that's sort of part of it. And there is, I mean, sure, there is ethical capitalism. That's sort of true, but you're going to have a problem, because there's going to be an issue, a competitive window. And my favorite is when Americans, especially like people like Trump, complaining about sending, work stuff being allocated out to China, when he did that himself. Because to cut your costs, that's what you do. You industrialize an enemy that now has the capacity to infringe upon all of your profits, which it's a short-sighted model in that way. But yeah, like, when he realizes he's betting that much against it, it's wild. I do like that that Dr. Burry saw that coming, saw that issue, and hedged that he wanted to get payouts. I think that's super savvy, because, I mean, we see that obviously they were insolvent. Lehman went to zero that day. Like, that's major. Stop distracting us with your cat. Our producer is trying to distract us. We can't hear you.
I think our producer has forgotten that we can see and hear her.
Oh, maybe. That's possible. Something I did want to mention that I just thought of before, when you see the actual impact of the housing crisis in Las Vegas now, because there's all these foreclosed properties that have pools that ended up having mosquitoes procreate in the pools. There didn't used to be heart and worm disease in Las Vegas, and now it's a huge problem for veterinarians, because there are all these foreclosed properties that are now basically
breeding grounds for
mosquito
mosquitoes.
breeding grounds, which is like really grotesque to see that ecological impact of something like that in this weird way, in like a desert where you'd never in fact ever consider that being an issue. It's pretty wild, and also gross, like really disgusting.
Oh yeah, it sounds disgusting. But yeah, it's just like, I mean, like, in a way, there's huge amounts of like, there's no like, going back to the points I was making last week about like the ruling class and the responsibility they have, like, for the consequence. Like, if you just have a plot of land sitting there breeding mosquitoes, nobody's gonna, like, nobody has to take responsibility for that, even though, like, now there's huge costs that are being foisted onto people who have to get their pets, like, taken care of, and like, who have, wait, does that affect people or not?
Heartworm. So no, I mean, basically, so it's pretty easy. Like, there's, I think you can, it's like a month, like 3-month set pill or something. Like,
yeah.
I remember when I would take my cats to the vet, they're like, do you want to do it? But my cats were basically indoor. I didn't even let them on my terrace because there were too many pigeons and I just didn't trust them. But, you know, for animals that are, it's disturbing. That's just going to impact the regular plant and like the life that's in, you know, in Red Rock Park or whatever. But yeah, I imagine there's probably more human implications that we don't think about that are not as obvious. So
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think there's always human implications for, like, having these, like, half-built, like, useless, like, plots of land, which is effectively, like, bits of capital that they decided they couldn't get enough of an investment back on to make it worthwhile.
I just think it also is a big fuck you to the homeless. Like there's this
yeah,
like giant
yeah, exactly.
tower that costs like a couple billion, and it's just there it is. And like for a while there were people breaking in, and it was like a real squatter situation.
Yeah,
It's just it's madness. It's you really see, and especially a town like Las Vegas, you see that dichotomy of the real ruling class and the money, and then just the felling, because it's a place where people can live and sort of survive year round outdoors, and it's it's gross. You see this real, and I think you do see Adam McKay chose to highlight some spots like on the freeway where there's like overpasses, because people do definitely live under those overpasses in Las Vegas, because in the summer you need to shelter from the sun, because we're talking about 117-degree temperatures. And these people are basically not really, they're allowed in the casino, but they're usually kicked out pretty quickly. Like there's not a lot of respite for that.
Totally. Yeah. You
programs.
Sorry?
There are no social programs in Nevada. It's 50th for psychiatric care. It's terrible. It's horrible.
Yeah. I mean, healthcare generally and like social care in the States is pretty, I mean, it's not great here, but like in the States is like, it's like chalk and cheese. But yeah, actually raising like Las Vegas is an interesting like parallel that I was going to make anyway. Like just the way that these sort of financial markets operate is like, it is like the rich and powerful literally just gambling. Like there's that whole scene with Selena Gomez and that economics guy, I don't remember his name, which is just like, it's literally them gambling huge amounts of money on the outcome of various different things, and like just how much of the bloody like finance world is built on that sort of thing, like that speculative kind of like gambling. And at the end of the day, you know, that money doesn't come from nowhere. Like that money exists because, you know, at some point down the line, a bunch of capitalists exploited a bunch of people. Or, you know, like in the States, it's also very likely that it came from fucking slave labor. Right. And you can't sort of, like, nobody thinks about the fact that that money, it doesn't just sort of exist in these pockets, the pockets of these people just like by coincidence. It exists because like working class people were exploited and produced that value. And now it's being like gambled on whether or not working class people can afford houses, or it's just sitting in the bloody Panama Islands or in Gibraltar or whatever tax haven they can come up with, and like sit there and just collect dust, even though there's like, you know, there's hundreds of thousands of things of like social use you could put the money towards. Like, you know, I mean, the response to the COVID crisis is just one of the most sort of egregious examples where you could just put a bunch of that money towards massively increasing the like the productive, like the production capacity of the vaccine. It's like, but it's not profitable enough to do that. Like they just rather like,
it'd be profitable if it was competitive. If somebody, and this is obviously like a plausible scenario in which, say these vaccines stop working and somebody has a new vaccine that does work, that's power. It's immense power. And I think that is the issue with capitalism is absolute power corrupts, right? And I mean, you see that in other systems. You've seen that in other economic systems that have broken down because of that greed element that seems to be a human failing. But I'm
going to interject and say, I don't think it's a human failing. I think it's a failing specifically of the people who are put in, like, it's not just everybody. I mean, everybody in that position would do the same thing, but I think it's a product of that position existing, like there being a class of people who like control shitloads of wealth, and have an investment in society, like running in an exploitative way, like a minority class that controls the wealth. It's a product of that rather than a product of like anything inherent about like human beings generally. Because
yeah, but I still think that there is this, because even when you have these egalitarian societies, at some point there is, people that are in charge, and with that responsibility, there can be temptation. And I think, unfortunately, you see the bad side of it a lot more than you see the good side. And I think that that's oftentimes the argument against systems that are not capitalist, because they try to obviously like keep things where they are. It's easier to argue against it than to try to change it. But yeah, I mean, maybe we'll have AI that can manage the money for everybody at some point, that will actually be egalitarian and won't have opinions and won't be able to embezzle money or make bad choices. But
problem is who's making the AI?
Exactly.
Who's like programming their who's programming their like moral code? Like, they're just going to be as biased as any presumably like rich tech company CEO is going to be.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know about Lauren, but I am definitely like watching the chat as well. So if people want to interject, like feel free, like I'm more than happy to take questions or comments, or like tell me what you think. The Big Short, like, are these people,
give it up for Brad Pitt and his ethical capitalism. I forgot that he was in it. I mean, like, it's so stupid. I've seen this movie so many times. I really love it. I think the way it was handled, of a very serious and depressing subject matter by a comedic director, was just excellent. And I think that you can get enraged, but also feel like there's, I don't know, we're learning, or we're trying to get better. We're trying to move past this. But it's just it's really well executed. And then Christian Bale, of course, who should be in every movie that you talk about on this show.
I don't think he's like, I mean, I definitely don't see a way to do Batman without talking about, basically, I mean, the take would not be too dissimilar to the sort of stuff I was talking about with American Psycho. It's like, I mean, like, he's got a shitload of money and his approach is to go and like beat up people in the streets, but it doesn't answer any of the social questions about like, why are these people like,
I think you can make a case that like Bruce Wayne is a secret Marxist.
I definitely don't want to make that case. I'm not interested in making that case at all.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I'll have to think about that. Yeah, well, subprime mortgages, such a good time. Let's see what else I have in my notes here.
Well, one of the things that I was gonna like go back to was the point of like the real economy, and there's an underlying tendency in capitalism, which Marx referred to as the tendency of the profit rate to fall. And the point of that argument is that like there's a ratio between the amount of money you have to put into the machinery or the productive like capacity, and the amount of money you have to put into wages. But wages is the only place that you can exploit value, because that's where value is created. So as that ratio increases, you're effectively decreasing the amount of money that you can, like the amount of profit you can make, because there's only a certain like smaller and smaller and smaller portion of that like capital that you can get profit out of. It's a more complicated theory than that, but like generally speaking, it's just like it's a tendency, and it's a problem that is faced, like the whole system of capitalism is facing at the moment. Like the only way to restore profit rates en masse is for there to be like big like almost cataclysmic events which destroy unprofitable sections of capital, which is the sort of thing that would have happened if the banks had been allowed to collapse.
Right.
But obviously that has huge like political and social implications, which the capitalists and the state weren't willing to deal with. And yeah, the other way is just like continuing to drive down wages as much as they possibly can, which I will definitely like. I mean, the capitalists are going to try and do that, like as a matter of course, basically. But yeah, so there's this underlying, and there's a problem of like until such a time as those profit rates can be restored, like capitalism as a system is going to continue to be limping along. It also is facing the political crisis of it doesn't have like nearly as much faith in the existing institutions that it used to. So like social democratic parties, even the Democrats in the States, you know, don't have the same like reputation that they used to for being able, like there's no faith in the ability of the system to meet the needs of ordinary people, which is true, but it's a thing that the capitalists have historically relied on to be able to keep the system functioning. It's one of the reasons why the far right is growing, is because people don't see like an alternative. And not that I endorse any of the views of the far right, but it's like people are looking for a political alternative that they can actually put some stock in and some faith in. And obviously the far right does that by blaming immigrants and, you know, brown people and whatever else, which is garbage. But it's sort of the only reason they have a voice or a hearing in the first place is because like there's that distance from the mainstream political forces. Yeah. There's another point I was going to make about. Oh, well, right, yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it really, understandably, it's annoying to me that the banks bail out. Obviously, it's necessary, but I just don't feel like there was enough of a reformation or an understanding of that problematic model. And there wasn't really a pivot. Obviously, when that happened, you know, and having the Bush administration ending, I mean, I'm obviously speaking about this from a very American viewpoint because that's where I live, and that's obviously I think we kind of lit the match that started this problem. It's gross to me that we're not that far out, and it's going to happen again, and it's not being looked at because things are seen in this political viewpoint. They're not seen as like beneficial to the people that make the world go round. Like there is this selfishness to capitalism that doesn't include, like, there is no human element to it. And that without that, it's going to be a problem no matter what you do. And
yeah,
you have people that want to reform, and you have people like, you know, Bernie, who runs, and people are like, oh, you know, but the ideology behind it is holistic, and it's for the betterment of everyone. It isn't necessarily trying to take advantage of people. And I think that is something that's misunderstood. I do understand people that want to gear towards conservatism, because that's something that they can understand, and that's something that they seemingly think can be controlled, because like less government would be good. But then you end up in situations where there's nobody minding the store, and then 2008 happens. So it's not really, you can't really live in this bubble of both anymore. There has to be fiscal responsibility that's taken on like in a national sense. And the best way to kind of do that is like a Marxist sort of ideology, I think.
I entirely agree. And I think that one of the reasons that there hasn't been any sort of like political law or legal reckoning for the crisis is that, yeah, there's just no like, it's like at the end of the day, like capitalists are allowed to get away with these sorts of things because that's exactly what the system is designed to do. It's designed to let them get away with these sorts of things, you know. And the crisis is one example, but the same thing is just as true of like like capitalists that destroy food crops because they want to drive up the price of whatever particular crop is has flooded the market. It's a thing. It's one of the absurdities of the system that Marx referred to as a crisis of overproduction. It's like having too much of a product drives the price down and makes it harder for you to make a profit of it, as from a capitalist perspective, which is just absolutely fucking absurd. Like the idea that meeting people's needs is somehow actively contradictory to the needs of the system. And that's true at the level of food produce, but it's also true at the level of banking legalities. It's a fundamental part of capitalism to have these constructs of finance capital have the freedom to make their own sort of investment decisions and blah blah blah, and it's part of the ideology. It's part of the the fundamental logic, and they can't tell their ass from their elbow when it comes to this sort of thing. But they're too focused on profits. They're too focused on how to make their next dollar. It's and they have no. They don't even Marxist. Bourgeois economics doesn't even have a comprehensive understanding of why these crises happen in the first place. Their answer is just the sort of surface level, there was a bubble. They don't explain where a bubble comes from. They don't explain how those bubbles burst.
I think you see it highlighted when they first sell. I think it was when they sold to Goldman in the film, and they're basically laughing them out of the room.
Yeah.
Because rather than go down and look into these loans and see that the problem was going to take place, they were just high-fiving each other because they just made massive commissions on these swaps.
Yeah.
First of all, we were going back to the Selena Gomez scene where there's that betting on betting on betting. The fact that these swaps didn't exist and the shorts were created, this happens all the time in the market. This happens all the time in sports betting, betting on Oscars, betting on anything you can, anything where a line can be set, where vig can be taken, there is impetus for that to take place. And that is going to leave some sour situations out there because they're not, again, it's not labor-based. These are theoretical ideas that are being bet on. And that is fine, but you have to worry about the value of these things and how they're going to impact. They can be a part of an economy, but they cannot be the foundation of an economy.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah, which is the contradiction, because more and more, the basis of the US, there's plenty of service provision and high tech kind of things that provide some of the the basis of the US economy, but more and more huge swathes of it are just aspects of finance capital, which is one of the reasons that you mentioned earlier about the moving of productive capacity of factories, mass production, that sort of thing to China. Actually, on one level, that's been the reason for China's growth, is their expansion of the real productive capacity, coupled with the fact that they have a substantial population that is easily that they have exploited at a much higher rate than populations in the US are willing to be exploited.
Right. I mean, we teed them up in a way, the 80s in the United States, that competition teed them up to be able to put their workforce in that position and then, industrialize in a way that would be competitive. I used to joke when I was a kid that everyone's oh, what are you gonna do when you grow up? I'm I don't know. I should probably learn to speak Chinese though, because they're going to be in charge of the economy, because I felt I saw it coming as a child. And the US just loves to turn, and I think it's charming how you have politicians that like to discuss, they like to hate on trade deals and stuff. And you're just you're basically the reason this started. because you decided that, you know, Apple saving money on the parts that they were making, like, and then there's campaigns, well, everything made in the USA. It's like, it's a little late now to have that, you know, and I think you see it, what I find interesting about the economics of The Big Short, where you see this like microcosm in Las Vegas. I feel like you see the microcosm of the American economic failings of the past in Detroit, where you see where there is this shell of a town that was an industrial stronghold that decided that we could save money if we send certain things abroad. Then you don't think about the long-term problems that that causes. And that's, again, the short-sighted system, because it is a very privatized system. You're thinking about yourself, and that's fine, but we can't be upset when these problems later on cause massive issues, because that was the, you know, carrot on the end of the stick was stupid, because it really didn't matter. Because, you know, in a very short period of time, you look at the industrialization of the world, global economy, and just bananas. Just, I don't know. We don't live long enough to get annoyed enough at it, I think, unfortunately. We need to live like 120 years to really make like things better, I guess. But I don't know. Maybe that could come out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the private aspect is definitely a substantial part of it, but like it also takes place in different forms when you see examples of like less sort of individualized like blocks of capital. So as I referred to last week, like the USSR, like it being a state capitalist as opposed to like a private capitalist kind of system. You know, they still had to compete on a capitalist market. They still had to.
He can't help himself.
No, they never can they? It's
no,
just
they
like
love a computer that you're in front of. They just
yeah, it's like time to see my butt. Time to see my butt.
At least, yeah, at least he's not sitting on the keyboard, which is a fave. So.
Yeah. What was I saying? Oh, USSR. Yeah. So like they still have to, on one level, compete on a global market. They still have to, if they want to be able to like have any sort of return on their investments, like it's not a private sort of individual making the decisions, but a bureaucracy. But the end decision is the same. It's like, what can we do to exploit workers more? What can we do to reduce costs and sometimes move production overseas is the answer to that. You know, what can we do to like expand the markets where we are like preferred providers or whatever, and that's where you get like imperialism of various kinds, you know, like cornering various and controlling the sale and movement of various different commodities is I mean, that's exactly the basis on which the capitalist economy is built. You know, if you look back at like the start of capitalism, the start of the British Empire, the real advantage they had was not, you know, that they had guns or whatever. I mean, the guns were a part of it, but the guns were used as a means to like create markets where they could sell their goods. And the control of markets is just and of resources is just like essential to the functioning of capitalism. It's one of the reasons.
I thought of something. So basically, I think an interesting element of Italian cinema to investigate might be some of the movies from the 60s, because they really identify the post-Mussolini Italian economy, which is a socialist system. And also, Italy doesn't really have any natural resources.
Hang on, sorry, post-Mussolini as a socialist system.
Yes, Italy is still a socialist country for the most part.
Like, I think you and I have different definitions of socialist. But anyway, continue.
Sure. But I would say that, like, you see just because when you have a smaller country like Italy, and you have, I don't know, you know, I'm not really certain, but I would say that there are, I'm thinking of a movie and I'm thinking of, like, I can see direct stills from it, but I can't think of the name right now. Oh, maybe Red Desert is what I'm thinking of.
Red Desert?
Red Desert would be like, you see a lot of that because there is a sense of nationalism, but there's also this feeling there because they don't have a lot of intrinsic value in their actual country. They don't have any commodities like oil or, forestry. Like there's nothing that they can just sell to other places. So a lot of that is just a different economic system to look at. So you do see I think it's unique and I think it's valuable when you have a system that is looking out for their own citizens, but can also take advantage of certain things that are valuable. They can commoditize. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm on a lot of cold medicine.
I mean, you're also recovering from COVID.
Yeah.
So, like,
I have like an axe in my brain from COVID. I can't even think anymore.
Totally fine. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you take the definition, I'm assuming when you say socialist, you mean like on the sort of more like socialized capitalist side of things, more like this sort of what's called the Swedish model.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's it's an example of there's a number of different ways that capitalism can take its various different forms. One of which does include a model where there's more sort of social support and whatever. And historically, that's been the case in Australia as well. A lot of the basis of that sort of thing is actually the result of historically very strong working class movements. Like the example of Medicare here and minimum wages and so on being where they are. It is the result of a long history of an organized and radical union movement that not only sort of took up the sort of their individual immediate concerns, but also did things like there was an example of one union in the 80s which refused to it was the construction union. It refused to build on certain plots of land because they were like, no, working class people deserve to have open green spaces to enjoy themselves in. They refused to, they demanded the construction of indigenous specific housing, there's a whole swathe of cases. There's one example where they stopped work at a building site at Macquarie University, one of the universities here, because they just kicked out a gay student from one of the dorms, and they refused to keep working on some of the buildings that were being constructed there until he was reinstated. So it's the more the working class takes up these social questions, the more that kind of solidarity is shown, historically speaking. The more those government policies are shaped in response to it. It's the same thing is true in Sweden. Historically, they had a very, very strong union movement, primarily based around timber, because that's one of their big commodities. But anyway. Yeah, I'm not really sure how it doesn't really directly relate to the Big Short. That's fine.
No, it doesn't. But I mean, I think that would be the sequel to the Big Short is people have power. You can activate that power if you want. Obviously discouraging that organization is a huge part of the capitalist model.
Totally.
And you see that definitely, all the time, especially in the United States. Just that the hate speech around just the concept of social programs, which is amusing because most of the social programs in the United States would be helping people that are below the poverty line that probably think that they want less government regulation, which is fair. You take education out of people's wheelhouse, and then they're going to believe what they're told to a degree. And also, I mean, these are so much of the economy was compressed over just the last 40 years. It's probably something that would normally have taken hundreds of years to look at, but because of just the way that technology took a toll, it's really wild. So I think you're going to see more cataclysmic events like the housing crisis in a compressed model like this. So it's not unreasonable to think that there might be another major, obviously we're in the pandemic and that's causing a lot of economic uprising at the moment. And you would hope that it would cause people to reevaluate the systems under which they live and the quality of life it causes and what does it means and what does it value. And I'd like to hope that in the United States, the idea of frontline workers or essential workers and that labor, that need for people would matter. It is going to take a lot to fight the other side of it. But it is that uprising, it's that striking, it's that not letting that kid live there, and they're not going to build. But you just kind of have to have a little bit more gumption. And I think that that's lacking because there's such a threat. The power has a threat, and that threat is always very scary. The USSR, there was certain aspects of threat. I mean, you're a Trotskyist. Do you know what that means? He was murdered. It's crazy. Actually, my brother just sent me, I haven't watched it yet. There's a movie about Navalny. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please do.
I'm excited to watch it. He said it's wild. So it should be cool. He was making fun of me because he said, "Why are you doing a show about Marxism?" I said, "Well, I'm just a guest. It's not my show. I'm more appropriately versed to talk about strip clubs and bars." Which would be fun to have a Marxist bar. Actually, if I ever opened a bar, I wanted it to be called Bomb Shelter. And it would look like a Soviet style like bomb shelter. But
that's really morbid.
What's that?
I said that's really morbid.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit morbid, but stylistically it would be very cool in like 60s. I don't know.
I mean, don't get me wrong, like I'm a fan of like brutalist like style architecture.
Yeah, I love brutalism.
But I don't know how much that's gonna be like appealing to the sorts of people who are like interested.
I mean, this was a pre-COVID idea. I feel like I probably have to go into like a softer hand now. I think people are a little over the idea of like hiding out. So
yeah, I think the sorts of bars that are gonna be like assuming things open up again at some point in the future, they will eventually. Right. But people are gonna want open spaces. Like people are gonna be sick of being.
I feel like I don't know. I feel like this could be a time where the lack of community would be momentum for people to want to have more of a collective ideology that is a system that they are part of. But who knows? Only time will tell, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that individuals are not like powerless on that front, but the biggest thing you can do is like try and convince other people of their power, like of their collective power. And that takes time and it takes effort, it takes conversations, it takes, organizing on the ground. Like it's a lot of work. But it's also like the reason I'm a socialist is because, there's not really a way out aside from that work, that's the way I see it anyway. Like, I don't think there's an alternative to capitalism that's going to come about just because somebody decides it's a nice idea.
Sure. Right. Yeah, we gotta rebrand. We gotta rebrand it. Maybe Christian Bale could be involved. I feel like he's the spokesperson for Nouveau Marxism. I could see him getting into it. What's next week's film?
Oh, well, I mean, next week's was going to be Starship Troopers.
Wow, I never seen it.
Which I don't think Bale is in.
He's not, but you should Photoshop him into the poster at the very least.
Look, I think I'm contractually obliged to at this point.
I mean, The Fighter has nothing to do with economics whatsoever, but you know, there's some good accents. I don't know if you've seen The Fighter. It's really good. But
I haven't. No. Yeah. So next week will be on imperialism and no, I'm not doing Batman. I'm not. I will do Willy Wonka before I do Batman.
ooh,
All right. Yeah. All right.
yeah.
I can make that work. God, I'm gonna hate myself later for saying that on record. Anyway, so yes, next week is going to be on what's it called? Starship Troopers, and talking about like imperialism and like the sorts of like fascist kind of government that's on display there, and the way that nationalism is used as a means to like alienate and denigrate people just on the basis of where they come from. Not that I think that bugs are particularly like sympathetic, but it's a it's a metaphor. It's not really about bugs. It's a metaphor. Anyway, we can get to that next week. If you want to wear an Oompa Loompa costume, I will applaud you. You are that's something you can take on your own head. Yeah,
well,
I think
he is a Norwegian author. I mean, there could be some undercurrent of socialist ideologies in there. Just saying. I don't know.
I think it's more a criticism. Anyway, let's talk about that next week. Yes, I think that I would rather, if I was going to have an actor be like a consistent actor throughout Cinemarx, I think Neil Patrick Harris would be one I'd prefer to have over Christian Bale. Although I can't say that there's anything I particularly want to talk about when it comes to like How I Met Your Mother. I think that's actually, I'm not a show I'm particularly impressed by.
I never watched it, which I've heard good things, but
he plays the best straight guy that I've ever seen a gay man do. So
I love him in Gone Girl. I love that movie through and through. It's creepy and awesome.
Anyway, so thank you so much all for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe, helps to support us. Next week is Imperialism and Starship Troopers. And then we've also got, what have we got tomorrow? Oh my God, where's that document thingy that I just did yesterday? I did it yesterday. Right, yes. So the next thing that's happening is Dick Simpson was here. So it's the Schitt's Creek discussion show. Then on Friday, there's Bring Sinkles, which Lauren is going to be on again. And then on Saturday, we've got the first episode of Trollopsism, which is going to be on Saturday, 9 to 10. And then Sunday, 5 to 6 is, sorry, these are all EST. They're not even remotely the right times for me, so they're probably not the right times for you if you're not in the East Coast. And Sunday is Reverse Milkshake Duck in Personalities with Dara and Devon on like Let's Talk Pop. I have no idea remotely what that means, but that's what we've got.
Thank you for having me. I hope I wasn't a total disappointment.
No, not at all. It was great to have, it was great to have somebody to talk to if nothing else, but like, no, you were great. And we'll see you all later.